She was 8 months pregnant, standing in 17-degree snow, knocking on her own front door. Inside, her husband sat with another woman on their couch. He walked to the window, made eye contact with his freezing pregnant wife, and then he smiled and closed the curtain. But what he did not know, a billionaire neighbor was watching through his security cameras, already dialing 911. What happens next will expose an 18-month affair, $800,000 in hidden assets, and a murder plot that will leave you speechless. Stay until the end because this wife does not just survive. She destroys him. If stories like this hit different, drop a like and subscribe. You do not want to miss how this ends. The lock clicked behind her. Vivian Mercer heard it from outside, a small mechanical sound that should have meant nothing at all. Just a tiny snap of metal against metal, the kind of noise that happens 1,000 times a day in houses all across America. But standing on her own front porch at 7:30, 2 in the evening, 8 months pregnant and wearing nothing but a thin cardigan over her maternity dress, that small click changed everything. She had only stepped out for a moment. The delivery driver had left a package by the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and she wanted to grab it before the snow ruined whatever was inside. Derek was home. She had heard him moving around in the living room just moments before. There was no reason to bring her phone or her coat for a 30-second trip down the walkway. Now the door was locked. Vivian tried the handle again, thinking perhaps the cold had made her fingers clumsy. The handle turned, but the door stayed firmly shut. Locked from the inside, the December wind cut through her cardigan like the fabric did not exist. She wrapped her arms around her pregnant belly, trying to shield her daughter from the cold that was already seeping into her bones. The temperature was 17 degrees. She had checked the weather app that morning while making Derek's coffee, the way she did every morning. 2 sugars, splash of cream, the routine of a wife who paid attention to details. She knocked on the door. 3 firm raps that echoed in the frozen evening air. "Derek," she called out, keeping her voice calm and reasonable. "The door locked behind me. Can you let me in?" Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, she saw movement inside, a silhouette she recognized instantly. Her husband's familiar shape, the broad shoulders she had fallen in love with 6 years ago, the confident posture she had always found so attractive. But there was another silhouette too, smaller, distinctly female, moving close to Derek in a way that made Vivian's stomach clench with something she refused to name. "Derek, please." She knocked again. "It is freezing out here. I need to come inside." The silhouettes moved closer together, and then she heard it. Laughter. A woman's laughter, high and musical and completely out of place in Vivian's living room, coming from the house where she had made breakfast that very morning, the house where her daughter's nursery waited upstairs, painted the perfect shade of yellow after 3 different attempts. Vivian moved to the front window, the large picture window that looked out onto their quiet suburban street, the one they had decorated with Christmas lights just last weekend. Derek on the ladder while Vivian handed him clips from below, both of them laughing about how tangled the light strings had gotten in storage. She cupped her hands against the glass to block the glare from those same Christmas lights, now twinkling in cheerful red and green patterns. What she saw inside made her heart stop. Derek sat on their gray sectional sofa, the one they had picked out together last spring after 3 weekends of furniture shopping, the one where he had held her hand when she told him about the positive pregnancy test, his eyes filling with tears of what she had believed was joy. A woman sat beside him, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. Young, maybe late 20s, pretty in that polished way that required time and money and attention. Her manicured hand rested on Derek's thigh with comfortable familiarity, like it had been there many times before, like it belonged there. Vivian knocked on the window. The sound was sharp against the cold glass. Derek looked up. He made direct eye contact with his pregnant wife standing outside in the snow. His expression did not change. No surprise, no guilt, no concern, just a calm, measured look, as if he were observing something mildly interesting but ultimately unimportant. Then he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not the smile he gave her when she brought him coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. Not the smile from their wedding photos. The one that had convinced her she had found her forever person. This smile was cold, deliberate, cruel, and then he reached for the curtain and pulled it closed. "No," Vivian whispered. The word came out broken, barely audible even to herself. "No, No, no. She pounded on the window with her open palm. The impact left smudges in the frost. Her hands stung from the cold, but she kept hitting the glass. Harder, more desperate. Derek. Her voice cracked. Derek, let me in. Please. Nothing. No movement behind the curtains. No sound except the wind and her own ragged breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the main road 3 blocks away. Her slippers were already soaked through. The fuzzy ones Derek had given her last Christmas, with little embroidered snowflakes on the toes. She had laughed when she opened them, called them perfect for lazy weekend mornings, kissed him in thanks. Now they were ruined, waterlogged and useless against the frozen porch. The baby kicked inside her belly, hard and insistent, as if she knew something was terribly wrong, as if she was trying to warn her mother that the world had just shifted on its axis. 7 minutes. That was how long Vivian stood there. 7 minutes of knocking, of calling his name, of begging him to let her in. 7 minutes of watching her breath form clouds in the frozen air while her husband watched her freeze. 7 minutes of realizing that everything she believed about her life was a lie. Her phone was inside. Her coat was inside. Her entire world was inside that house. And the man she had married, the man she had given up her career for, the man she had created a child with, was inside too. With someone else, the cold seeped deeper. Her fingers were going numb despite how hard she rubbed them together. Her toes had already lost feeling inside the ruined slippers. She could feel her body temperature dropping, could feel the dangerous lethargy trying to creep into her limbs. Hypothermia. The words surfaced from some half-remembered first aid course. Early-stage hypothermia. Keep moving. Find shelter. Do not stop moving. The neighbor's house. The big one. The estate. Really. With the iron gates and the perfectly manicured hedges and the long driveway that disappeared behind a row of evergreens. The one belonging to the man she had seen maybe twice in 3 years of living in this neighborhood. She did not even know his name. Just that he was wealthy. Obviously. Private. Clearly. Rarely home, according to the neighborhood gossip. Some kind of tech billionaire or investor or something. The kind of person who lived in a different world than Vivian and her 2 sugar splash of cream husband. But his house had lights on. Someone was home. The walk felt endless. Her feet did not want to cooperate. Each step required conscious effort, a deliberate command from her brain to her legs that her legs were increasingly reluctant to obey. The snow kept falling. The wind kept cutting. The baby kept kicking, angry and scared, just like her mother. She made it to the gate, a massive iron structure with intricate scrollwork that probably cost more than her car. Her frozen fingers found the intercom button. She pressed it once, twice, 3 times. Her finger would not stop shaking. Static crackled through the speaker. Then a voice, deep, male, cautious but alert. Hello, please. Vivian's voice cracked on the word. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form syllables. Please help me. I am pregnant. My husband locked me out. I do not have my phone. It is so cold. Please. Silence stretched for 1 second. 2. 3. An eternity compressed into heartbeats. Then the voice came again. Firm and immediate. No hesitation. No questions. The gate is opening now. Walk straight to the front door. I am calling 911. The iron gates swung inward with a mechanical hum. Vivian stepped onto the driveway and felt warmth radiating up through her ruined slippers. The driveway was heated. Actual heated pavement, keeping the surface clear of snow and ice. Such a strange detail to notice while her world collapsed around her. She walked toward the house, 1 foot in front of the other. The driveway seemed to stretch forever. A path through a winter wonderland that she was too cold and too broken to appreciate. The front door opened before she reached it. A man stood there, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. Tall, well over 6 feet. Dark hair with touches of gray at the temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. He wore a cashmere sweater in deep burgundy that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Inside, his voice was calm but commanding. Now it was not a question, not a request, a directive issued by someone accustomed to being obeyed, but without the arrogance that such authority often carried. He sounded like someone who was used to taking charge of emergencies, like someone who knew what to do when the world fell apart. Vivian stepped into warmth. The transition from frozen porch to heated foyer was so sudden, so complete, that her body could not process it. Her knees buckled without warning. The sudden temperature change overwhelming her system. Strong arms caught her before she hit the marble floor. "I have got you." His voice was steady and calm, the kind of voice that made everything seem manageable, even when nothing was. "The ambulance is 4 minutes out. Can you tell me your name, Vivian?" She managed through chattering teeth. "Vivian Mercer. I am Bennett, Bennett Calloway. You are safe now. I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" She nodded. The baby kicked again, angry and scared and insistent, just like her mother, 23 minutes earlier. Bennett Calloway had been eating dinner alone. This was not unusual. Most of his dinners were solitary affairs, taken at the kitchen island with a book propped against the salt shaker and security monitors playing silently in the background. His grandmother Cordelia called it pathetic. His therapist called it avoidance behavior. Bennett called it Tuesday. The security monitors were a habit he had developed 3 years ago, after Rachel died. 12 cameras covering every angle of his property, recording 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. His head of security thought it was overkill for a residential property. His lawyers thought it was liability. Bennett thought it was the only way he could sleep at night. Not that he slept much anyway. He had been reading a biography of Theodore Roosevelt, trying to focus on the words while his mind wandered to quarterly projections and charitable foundation meetings and all the things that filled his days without actually meaning anything. The salmon on his plate had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He should eat it. He knew he should eat it. But food had lost its appeal somewhere around the 3rd anniversary of finding out he was too late. Movement on monitor 4 caught his attention. The camera covered the eastern perimeter of his property, the boundary line between his estate and the house next door, the Mercer house. He had met the couple exactly twice, both times at neighborhood association meetings that he attended out of obligation rather than interest. She was pregnant. He remembered. Due sometime in January or February. The husband was some kind of investment manager, charming in that aggressive way that made Bennett instinctively distrust him. A woman was stumbling across the snow-covered lawn toward his gate. Bennett leaned closer to the monitor, his forgotten dinner pushed aside. The woman was pregnant, very pregnant, and she was wearing nothing but a thin sweater and what looked like bedroom slippers. In 17-degree weather, he switched to camera 2, which covered the front of the Mercer property. What he saw made his blood run cold. The pregnant woman, Mrs. Mercer, was standing on her own front porch. She was knocking on the door. She was clearly calling out to someone inside. And through the front window, illuminated by Christmas lights, Bennett could see a man watching her and doing nothing. The man moved to the window. Bennett zoomed in, his hands suddenly unsteady on the controls. The resolution was sharp enough to capture facial expressions, one of the upgrades he had insisted on after Rachel. The man looked directly at his pregnant wife standing in the snow, and he smiled. Then he reached for the curtain and pulled it closed. Bennett was already dialing 911 before the curtain finished moving. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Bennett Calloway. I am at 1423 Thornwood Lane. My neighbor's wife is locked outside in the snow. She is pregnant, approximately 8 months. The temperature is 17 degrees. Her husband is inside the house and is deliberately not letting her in. I have video footage. Send an ambulance immediately. Sir, are you sure the husband is deliberately keeping her out? I watched him look at her through the window and close the curtain. I am watching her on my security cameras right now. She has been outside for at least 7 minutes. This is an emergency. Send help now. He hung up before the dispatcher could ask any more questions. Let them send police along with the ambulance. Let them sort out whether this was domestic dispute or attempted murder. Right now, all that mattered was getting that woman inside before she froze to death. The intercom buzzed. She had made it to his gate. Bennett moved faster than he had moved in 3 years. The lethargy that had settled into his bones since Rachel burning away in a surge of adrenaline. He hit the gate release, turned on the driveway heating to maximum, and headed for the front door. His grandmother appeared on the landing of the staircase, wrapped in a silk robe and already looking suspicious. Bennett, a pregnant woman is locked outside in the snow. Ambulance is 4 minutes out. To her credit, Cordelia Calloway did not ask questions. She simply said, I will get the heating blankets from the guest room, and disappeared back down the hallway with a speed that belied her 74 years. Bennett opened the front door. The woman was staggering up the driveway, her wet slippers leaving prints on the heated pavement. She was shaking violently, her arms wrapped around her pregnant belly, her face pale and drawn with a combination of cold and shock that he recognized far too well. Inside, he said, "Now." She made it 3 steps into the foyer before her legs gave out. Bennett caught her, felt how cold she was even through her cardigan, felt the tremors running through her body like electrical shocks. "I have got you," he said, and the words came out steadier than he felt. "The ambulance is 4 minutes out. Can you tell me your name, Vivian?" "Vivian Mercer. I am Bennett. Bennett Calloway. You are safe now. I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, her teeth chattering too hard for words. Cordelia appeared with an armful of heated blankets, the kind that plugged into the wall and maintained a constant temperature. She wrapped Vivian with practiced efficiency, layer after layer, while Bennett kept his hands on her shoulders, steadying her, grounding her. "There now," Cordelia said, her voice carrying that particular blend of maternal warmth and steel that had made her one of the most respected federal judges in the state before her retirement. What kind of monster leaves a pregnant woman in the snow? Vivian could not answer, could not form words around the enormity of what had just happened. She just sat there on Bennett's marble floor, wrapped in heated blankets, staring at nothing while tears streamed silently down her face. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Red and blue lights would be strobing through the windows soon, painting the elegant foyer in emergency colors. "The police will want to talk to you," Bennett said quietly. "You do not have to say anything you are not ready to say, but I am going to tell them exactly what I saw through my window." Vivian looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. "What did you see?" His jaw tightened. Something dark flickered in those gray eyes. Pain, maybe, or recognition, like he understood something about the situation that she had not yet grasped. "I saw your husband look at you through that window. I saw him see you standing there in the cold. I saw—" Close the curtain. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I watched you knocking for 7 minutes before you came here." I counted. 7 minutes. Derek had watched her freeze for 7 minutes, had heard her calling his name through the glusters, had made direct eye contact with his pregnant wife standing in 17-degree weather, and he had smiled, and he had closed the curtain. The ambulance arrived in a chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices and people who knew what to do when bodies started shutting down from cold. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and expertise, wrapping Vivian in specialized blankets, attaching monitors to check on the baby, asking questions she answered on autopilot. "Core temperature, 94.2 degrees, one of them announced. "We need to start warming protocols immediately." 94.2. Normal body temperature was 98.6. She had lost over 4 degrees of core body heat in less than 30 minutes. Dangerous territory. Life-threatening territory. For her and for the baby. The paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher. Bennett appeared beside her, his presence somehow solid and reassuring in the chaos. "I will follow in my car," he said. "You will not be alone at the hospital." She should have told him he did not have to, should have protested that he was a stranger, that she could not impose, that she did not need saving. But the truth was, she did need saving. And right now, this stranger who had called 911 before she even asked for help or home was the only person in the world she trusted. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." He just nodded and stepped back as they wheeled her out into the cold. The hospital was too bright and too loud and too full of strangers asking questions Vivian did not have answers for. They wheeled her into a private room in the obstetrics wing and hooked her to machines that beeped and whirred and tracked every vital sign. A nurse appeared with more warm blankets. Another started an IV for fluids. Dr. Catherine Pierce, the obstetrician on call, checked her cervix and announced that the baby was fine. Not in distress, holding steady despite the trauma. Fine. Her daughter was fine. 8 months of careful prenatal care, of vitamins and healthy eating, and avoiding everything the book said to avoid. 8 months of doing everything right, of being the perfect expectant mother. And then her husband had tried to freeze her to death. No, she pushed that thought away. It was too big, too overwhelming, too impossible to process while machines beeped and strangers hovered and her body slowly warmed back to normal temperature. Detective Morrison arrived about 45 minutes after she did. He was middle-aged and balding, with kind eyes that had clearly seen too much over the years. The kind of detective who had learned to separate his emotions from his job, but who still cared enough that it showed. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, pulling a chair close to her bed, "I need to ask you some questions about tonight. Are you feeling up to that?" Vivian nodded. "Can you walk me through what happened?" "Start from the beginning. Take your time." So she did. The package by the mailbox. Stepping outside without her phone because it was supposed to take 30 seconds. The door locking behind her. The woman on her couch. Derek's face in the window. The smile. The curtain closing. Detective Morrison wrote it all down in a small notebook, his pen moving in steady strokes. His expression remained carefully neutral, professionally blank. But she saw something shift in his eyes when she described the curtain closing. A hardening, a judgment he was trying not to make. "And you say you knocked for approximately 7 minutes before going to the neighbor's house." "That is what he told me." "The neighbor, Mr. Calloway. He said he was watching through his window. He said he counted." Detective Morrison nodded slowly. "Mr. Calloway has already given his statement. He was very detailed, very thorough." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "He has security cameras on his property, multiple angles, high definition. He has offered the footage to the department." Security cameras? Vivian had not thought about that. Rich people had security cameras. Of course they did. Which meant somewhere out there on some hard drive or cloud server, there was a recording of her standing in the snow, knocking on her own door, while her husband watched and did nothing. Proof, evidence, documentation of exactly what had happened. "Mrs. Mercer." Detective Morrison leaned forward slightly. "I need to ask you directly. Do you want to press charges?" The question caught her off guard. "Charges for what?" "Given the circumstances you have described, we are looking at several potential charges." He ticked them off on his fingers. "Reckless endangerment. You are 8 months pregnant. The temperature was 17 degrees. He deliberately left you outside for an extended period. Depending on what the district attorney decides, we could potentially add attempted assault, or even worse, given your vulnerable condition." Reckless endangerment. The words felt foreign, clinical, like something from a courtroom drama on television. Not her actual life, not her actual husband. "I need to think about it," she said. Detective Morrison nodded and closed his notebook. "That is completely understandable. Take all the time you need. Here is my card." He placed it on the bedside table. "Call me when you are ready to talk more. Day or night, my cell number is on there." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Mercer, I have been doing this job for 22 years. I have seen a lot of domestic situations, a lot of marriages falling apart in ugly ways." His voice softened. "What your husband did tonight was not a mistake. It was not an accident. A man does not look at his pregnant wife standing in the snow and close the curtain by accident. I just want you to know that. Whatever you decide to do next, whatever you decide about charges, do not let anyone tell you that you are overreacting. Do not let anyone tell you that what happened was not exactly what it looked like." He left before she could respond. The room fell quiet except for the machines monitoring her vital signs. Then her phone buzzed. A nurse had retrieved it from the house, along with a few other personal items. The officers had gone to collect some things. Derek had been cooperative. Apparently, concerned about her welfare. Cooperative. Concerned. Derek was putting on a show for the police. Of course he was. He had always been good at performing the perfect husband when other people were watching. Vivian picked up her phone. The screen lit up, showing dozens of notifications. But it was the text messages that caught her attention. 43 unread messages from a contact labeled Gym Trainer. Vivian did not have a gym trainer. She had not been to a gym since learning she was pregnant 8 months ago. She opened the thread. The world tilted sideways. "Baby, I cannot wait to see you tonight. She is so boring lately. All she talks about is the pregnancy. I know, babe. Soon you will be free. We will have our own baby. A real family. I picked out those earrings you wanted." She did not notice the charge. She never checks the statements anymore. "You are too good to me. Only 3 more months until we can be together for real. Cannot stop thinking about last night. You are amazing. She has no idea what she is missing. I told her I had a work dinner. She believed me. She always believes me. The messages went on, hundreds of them, 18 months of them, going back and back and back. Flirty texts and explicit photos and plans for a future that did not include Vivian or her daughter. A whole secret life documented in digital conversations, hidden in plain sight on her husband's phone under a label designed to avoid suspicion. Gym trainer. He had been clever about it, just vague enough to seem innocent if she ever glanced at his phone. The affair had started 18 months ago. They had been married for 4 years. They had started trying for a baby 6 months after the affair began. Derek had been sleeping with another woman the entire time. While Vivian tracked her ovulation with apps and thermometers and careful attention, while she underwent 3 rounds of fertility treatments that left her exhausted and emotional and grateful for his supposed support, while she cried over negative tests and celebrated the positive one with what she thought was shared joy, all of it, every moment, every tender word, every supportive gesture, a lie. The phone slipped from Vivian's fingers and clattered against the bed rail. Bennett Calloway stood in the doorway, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "May I come in?" She nodded. He crossed to the chair Detective Morrison had vacated and sat down. "What is it? What happened?" She could not speak, could not form words around the magnitude of what she had just discovered. She just handed him the phone. He read silently, scrolling through message after message. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened with each scroll. His knuckles whitened around the phone. 18 months, he said finally. His voice was carefully controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. The affair has been going on for 18 months. Vivian nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. The entire time you were trying to have a baby, the entire time you were going through fertility treatments. Another nod. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not bother wiping them away. What was the point? Her entire marriage had been a performance. Every memory she treasured was tainted. Every "I love you" had been a rehearsed line in a play she had not known she was watching. Bennett handed the phone back. His movements were careful, controlled, like he was containing something that wanted to explode. "You need a lawyer," he said. "A good one. Someone who specializes in divorce. Specifically high-conflict divorce with significant assets and potential criminal charges. I can recommend someone. Best in the state." Vivian stared at him through her tears. This stranger who had saved her life. This billionaire who had nothing to gain from helping her. This man who was looking at her with something that might have been understanding. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "I am nothing to you. Just a neighbor you have seen twice in 3 years. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, like he was choosing each word with great care. 3 years ago, my fiancée died. Domestic violence. Her ex-husband found her after years of hiding. One afternoon while I was traveling for work, the security cameras I installed captured everything, every second of what he did to her." Vivian's breath caught. "After that, I made some changes. More cameras, better security, and a habit of watching, paying attention, noticing things that seem wrong." He met her eyes with an intensity that made something shift in her chest. "Tonight, I was watching the feeds while having dinner. I saw you go outside to get a package. I saw the door close behind you. I saw you knocking. And I saw your husband look at you through the window and close the curtain." He paused. "I saw him smile." Vivian. "Right before he pulled the curtain closed. He smiled at you standing there in the snow, and then he went back to his girlfriend like you did not exist." The confirmation hit her fresh. She had not imagined it. The smile was real. The cruelty was real. And there was a witness. There was proof. "I called 911 before you even made it to my gate." Bennett continued. "I was watching you walk across the yard, and I was already dialing, because I knew what I was seeing. I knew what deliberate abandonment looked like, and I was not going to let it end the way it ended for Rachel. His fiancée, Rachel. A real person who had loved this man and been taken from him by violence. "I am sorry," Vivian said softly, "for your loss, and I am sorry for yours." He stood. "Let me get the car. It is time to get you somewhere safe." 3 in the morning. Vivian could not sleep. She was in the guest room of Bennett's estate, a space larger than her entire first apartment after college. The bed was king-sized with sheets that felt like clouds. The bathroom had heated floors and a soaking tub big enough to swim in. The windows looked out over acres of manicured grounds, now covered in pristine white snow. She barely noticed any of it. Instead, she sat at a small desk in the corner, her laptop open in front of her, doing what she had been trained to do before she gave it all up for Derek: forensic accounting. She had not touched a spreadsheet in 2 years, not since Derek convinced her to quit her job at the firm to focus on starting a family. "We only need one income," he had said, "and I want you to be relaxed. Stress is bad for conception." She had believed him, had trusted him, had walked away from a career she had spent 10 years building because he asked her to. Now she was using every skill she had learned in that career to tear his world apart. The first thing she found was a bank account she did not know existed. Joint name, but the statements went to an email address she had never seen before. $847,000 had been transferred to this account over the past 18 months. Small amounts at first, easy to miss, then larger chunks as Derek grew bolder. Their entire savings, gone. The second thing she found was a property, a downtown condo in a luxury building with a doorman and a rooftop pool, purchased 18 months ago. The same month the affair began. According to those text messages, the love nest. Derek had set up an apartment for himself and his mistress, while Vivian clipped coupons and made careful grocery lists and convinced herself they needed to be responsible with money because of the baby. The third thing she found made her blood run cold: a life insurance policy on Vivian Mercer. $2 million, taken out 6 months ago. Derek was the sole beneficiary. And the Google searches, stored in the cloud backup that Derek did not know she could access. Hypothermia death time, how long to freeze outside, accidental death insurance payout. Vivian stared at the screen, her hands trembling so hard she could barely move the cursor. He had not just wanted her to leave. He had wanted her to die. The locked door was not impulsive cruelty. It was not a moment of anger or a stupid mistake made in the heat of passion. It was a calculated attempt to kill her for insurance money. The man she had married, the man she had given up her career for, the man she had created a child with, had tried to murder her. She barely made it to the bathroom before she vomited. When she emerged, shaking and pale and somehow more determined than she had ever been in her life, Bennett was standing in the doorway of the guest room. He looked like he had not slept either. "I saw the light on," he said. "Are you all right?" "No." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "But I am going to be—" She showed him what she had found: the hidden accounts, the secret property, the life insurance policy, the Google searches. Bennett's face went through several expressions as he scrolled through her documentation. Shock, anger, something cold and calculating that she had not seen before. "You found all this yourself?" he asked. "I was a forensic accountant before I quit to support his career." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Biggest mistake of my life. Turns out I should have been auditing my own marriage." "This is attempted murder," Bennett said quietly. "Premeditated. Documented. The Google searches alone would be enough to convince a jury." "I know. What are you going to do?" Vivian saved everything to 3 separate cloud drives. Then she closed her laptop and looked at Bennett with eyes that had changed since the night before. Harder now. More focused. The naive wife who had believed in her happy marriage was gone. In her place was someone who had just discovered how close she had come to dying. "I am going to destroy him," she said. "Systematically. Completely. I am going to take everything he has, expose everything he did, and make sure he spends the rest of his life regretting the day he met me." Bennett studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, and something like approval flickered in his gray eyes. "I know the best divorce attorney in the state. His name is Preston Aldridge. They call him the executioner. He has never lost a custody case in 20 years. Call him, it is 4 in the morning. I do not care." Bennett pulled out his phone and dialed. Preston Aldridge arrived at the estate by 7, looking perfectly composed despite the early hour and the foot of snow that had fallen overnight. He was a trim man in his mid-50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. He spread the documents Vivian had compiled across the dining room table, his expression professionally neutral as he reviewed her findings. In 30 years of practice, he said finally, I have never seen a case this well documented by a client. You did all of this yourself. In one night, I could not sleep. Vivian said, might as well be productive. Mrs. Mercer. Preston closed his folded paper and looked at her directly. Your husband did not just cheat on you. He did not just steal from you. Based on these Google searches and the timing of that life insurance policy, he attempted to kill you for financial gain. This is not a divorce case. This is a criminal case. Can we pursue both? We can, and we should. Then let us begin. Preston opened his folder again. First, we freeze his assets before he can move them further. I will file an emergency motion this morning. Second, we get all of this to Detective Morrison. The attempted murder angle strengthens your position in every other aspect of this case. What about custody? That is all I really care about. My daughter, based on the evidence of attempted murder of a pregnant woman, no court in this country will grant him any custody rights. Preston's voice was matter-of-fact, confident. He will be fighting to stay out of prison, not fighting for visitation. Vivian felt something loosen in her chest. The fear she had been carrying since the moment she read those Google searches, the terror that Derek might somehow still have access to her daughter, began to ease. One more thing. Preston said, your husband does not know you have found any of this. He thinks you are a naive wife who does not check bank statements. That gives us an advantage, but only if we move fast. Once he realizes you are fighting back, he will start destroying evidence. Then we move fast. Preston gathered his documents. I will have the emergency motions filed by noon. In the meantime, do not contact your husband. Do not respond to any messages from him. Let him think you are in shock and processing. I can do that. Good. He stood to leave, then paused. Mrs. Mercer, I want you to understand something. What you did tonight, finding this evidence, documenting it, preparing your case before the sun came up. That is not what most clients do. Most clients cry and sleep and wait for someone else to fix things. You started fixing things yourself. He met her eyes with something that might have been respect. That is going to win you this war. After he left, Vivian sat alone in Bennett's dining room, surrounded by documents that proved her husband had tried to kill her. Her daughter kicked inside her belly, strong and insistent and alive. We made it through the night. She told her daughter silently, now we are going to make him pay for everything he did. 2 weeks later, Vivian thought she had won. The emergency motions had worked. Derek's accounts were frozen, his assets were locked. The condo downtown had been seized as evidence of fraud. Detective Morrison had opened a criminal investigation based on the Google searches and the life insurance policy. And while no charges had been filed yet, the threat of them hung over every legal proceeding like a storm cloud. Derek's lawyer, a nervous man named James Mitchell, who clearly wished he had never taken this case, had requested a settlement meeting. They want to negotiate. Preston told Vivian over the phone. His voice carried that particular satisfaction of a predator scenting blood in the water. They know they are losing. The settlement meeting took place in a conference room at Preston's law firm. Vivian arrived with her mother, Lorraine, who had driven 4 hours through the night when she first heard what happened and had not left her daughter's side since. Derek was already seated when they entered. He looked smaller than Vivian remembered, tired. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, as if he had lost weight. Good, Vivian thought. Consequences have a way of shrinking people. Preston opened the proceedings with surgical precision. We are here to discuss a fair resolution of the dissolution of the Mercer marriage. My client is seeking full recovery of all marital property, including hidden assets. Additionally, she seeks sole legal and physical custody of the minor child and spousal support commensurate with the standard of living established during the marriage. James Mitchell cleared his throat. His hands were visibly trembling. My client is prepared to offer a 70-30 split of acknowledged marital assets. Additionally, we propose shared custody with Mr. Mercer receiving visitation rights every other weekend and alternating holidays. Vivian almost laughed. After everything Derek had done, he still thought he could negotiate. Preston slid a folder across the table. This is the evidence we have compiled regarding Mr. Mercer's attempted murder of his pregnant wife, life insurance policy taken out 6 months ago, Google searches for hypothermia, death time, security footage of him watching his wife freeze for 7 minutes and deliberately closing the curtain. Derek's face went white. Based on this evidence, Preston continued, criminal charges are imminent. The district attorney has indicated strong interest in pursuing attempted murder charges, along with insurance fraud and financial crimes. James Mitchell whispered urgently in Derek's ear. Derek shook his head. More whispers. More head shaking. Finally, Derek's lawyer spoke. My client is prepared to increase his offer. Full asset recovery for Mrs. Mercer. Sole custody. No visitation. We ask only that Mrs. Mercer decline to press charges. Vivian looked at Derek, really looked at him. The man she had loved. The man she had married. The man who had tried to kill her for $2 million. She should take the deal. Preston had advised her to take any deal that gave her full custody and full assets. Fighting for criminal charges was risky, uncertain, emotionally draining, but she wanted more. I want him to admit what he did, she said, publicly, on record. I want everyone to know. Preston put a hand on her arm. Mrs. Mercer, I need to advise you that pushing for more could backfire. We have an excellent deal on the table. Vivian ignored him. She was looking at Derek, at the fear in his eyes, at the desperation leaking through his careful facade. Admit what you did, on the record, and I will consider not pressing charges. Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave a tiny nod. Fine, Derek said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I admit that I was seeing someone else. I admit that I transferred money to private accounts. I admit that the night in the snow was regrettable. Regrettable, Vivian repeated. Not attempted murder. Regrettable. Well, it was not attempted murder. I did not hear you knocking. I was wearing headphones. Your client's Google search history would suggest otherwise. Preston said coldly, those searches were research. I write crime fiction as a hobby. I was researching for a story. The lie was so bold, so shameless, that Vivian felt something snap inside her. He was never going to admit it. He was never going to tell the truth. Even now, with everything she had found, with all the evidence against him, he was still lying. No deal. She said, we go to court. We let a jury decide what those Google searches meant. Vivian, Preston warned. No deal. She stood up and walked out of the conference room, leaving Derek and his pathetic lies behind her. In the hallway, her mother caught up with her. That was brave. Lorraine said, maybe stupid, but brave. He was never going to admit it. Vivian said, but he was never going to tell the truth. And I refused to let him pretend this was anything other than what it was. So we fight, we fight. They did not know, as they walked out of that law firm, that Derek was already planning his counterattack. They did not know that he had been preparing for this possibility for months. They did not know that the fight was about to get much, much worse. Vivian thought she had won. She was wrong. The hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Vivian arrived at the courthouse feeling confident. She had the evidence. She had the best lawyer in the state. She had the truth on her side. She should have known that truth does not always win. Derek's lawyer requested to present new evidence. Judge Patricia Winters, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, granted the request. James Mitchell connected a laptop to the courtroom's display system. His hands were not trembling anymore. In fact, he looked almost confident. Your Honor, we would like to present video evidence that speaks to Mercer's mental state during the marriage. The screen flickered to life. Vivian saw herself on her kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The timestamp said August 14th. Then another clip. Vivian throwing a dish against the wall, screaming. September 3rd. Another. Vivian talking to herself in the bathroom mirror, her expression wild, her words incoherent. October 19th. Another. Vivian sitting in the dark at 3 in the morning, rocking back and forth, muttering about voices. November 2nd. Clip after clip after clip. 6 months of footage, carefully edited to make her look like a woman losing her grip on reality. Your Honor, James Mitchell said, his voice dripping with false concern. My client has been documenting his wife's mental deterioration for months. He was planning to seek professional help for her after the holidays. The incident on December 19th was not attempted murder. It was a husband at the end of his rope, dealing with a mentally unstable wife who stepped outside during one of her episodes and accidentally locked herself out. Vivian could not breathe. She remembered those moments, but not like this. Not the way the videos showed them. The crying on the kitchen floor had been after her third miscarriage, before the pregnancy finally took. She had been grieving. She had been human. The dish she threw had slipped from her hands while she was doing dishes with wet fingers. It had shattered by accident, and she had cursed in frustration. Normal. Completely normal. The talking in the mirror had been practicing what she would say to her sister about the baby announcement. She had wanted to get the words right. The rocking in the dark had been dealing with insomnia and back pain and all the discomforts of late pregnancy. She had been tired. She had been uncomfortable. She had been 8 months pregnant. But edited together, stripped of context, presented with sympathetic narration, she looked insane. Derek had cameras throughout their house. He had been recording her for months. He had been building a case against her sanity while she slept beside him, while she made his coffee, while she believed he loved her. Your Honor, my client requests a psychological evaluation of Mrs. Mercer before any custody decisions are made. Additionally, we ask that her access to the minor child be supervised pending the results of this evaluation. Judge Winters looked at the footage, then at Vivian, then at Preston. Mr. Aldridge, your response. Preston's face was carefully blank, but Vivian could see the tension in his shoulders. He had not expected this. Your Honor, this footage is clearly edited and taken out of context. We request time to analyze the original files and prepare a response. Granted, however, the court notes that Mrs. Mercer's mental state is now a relevant factor in custody determination. She turned to Vivian with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Mercer, I am ordering a psychological evaluation to be completed within 14 days. Until that evaluation is complete, the question of custody will remain open. The gavel came down. Vivian sat frozen in her seat as the courtroom emptied around her. Her mother's hand was on her shoulder. Preston was saying something about appeals and counter-evidence, but she could not hear any of it over the roaring in her ears. She had been winning, and now she was losing. Derek walked past her on his way out. He paused just long enough to lean down and whisper in her ear, "Did you really think I would let you take everything from me? I have been planning this for 2 years. Vivian, you never had a chance." Then he was gone, and Vivian was left alone with the ruins of her victory crumbling around her. That night, she lay in the guest room at Bennett's estate, staring at the ceiling. The baby kicked restlessly inside her, as if sensing her mother's distress. 2 years. Derek had been planning this for 2 years. Before the affair, before the pregnancy, before any of it. He had married her knowing he would eventually destroy her. The door opened softly. Bennett stood in the doorway, a cup of tea in his hands. "I heard you were not sleeping," he said. "Hard to sleep when your husband has been secretly filming you for 6 months and edited the footage to make you look crazy." Bennett sat down in the chair beside her bed. "What are you going to do? I do not know." Vivian's voice cracked. For the first time since December 19th, she felt truly defeated. He thought of everything, every move I made. He had a counter move ready. I was playing checkers while he was playing chess. Then stop playing checkers. What does that mean? It means you are thinking like a victim. You are reacting to what he does. But you are a forensic accountant. Vivian, you are trained to find patterns, to uncover fraud, to see what other people miss. Stop reacting. Start investigating. Something shifted in Vivian's chest, a small spark of defiance that refused to die. "You are right," she said slowly. "I have been playing defense this whole time, waiting for him to attack, then trying to counter. And now I am going to find out everything, every secret he has, every lie he has told, every person he has manipulated." She sat up, her exhaustion burning away in a surge of determination. He has been planning this for 2 years, but he made one mistake. What mistake? He underestimated me. He thinks I am the naive wife who does not check bank statements. He does not know that I have already found his hidden accounts, his love nest, his insurance fraud, and he definitely does not know what else I am capable of finding. Her eyes met Bennett's, hard and focused and ready for war. "I am done being the victim," she said. "It is time to destroy him." The first catastrophe came on January 23rd. Harper Thornton, Vivian's best friend of 12 years, took the stand as a character witness. Vivian had expected support. She had counted on it. Instead, Harper destroyed her, Miss Thornton? James Mitchell asked, his voice smooth and sympathetic. How long have you known the defendant? 12 years. We were college roommates, and in that time, have you observed any concerning behavior from Mrs. Mercer? Harper's eyes flickered to Vivian, then away. Yes. Can you describe this behavior? She has always been emotionally unstable, prone to anxiety attacks, obsessive about certain things. When she met Derek, she became fixated on him. She would talk about him constantly, plan her schedule around seeing him, get upset if he did not call when she expected. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. And during the pregnancy, James Mitchell pressed, it got worse. She became paranoid. She thought Derek was hiding things from her. She would check his phone when he was sleeping, go through his emails, accuse him of lying about where he had been. She called me several times in the middle of the night, crying, saying she could not trust anyone. Vivian wanted to scream. Those late-night calls had been real, but Harper was twisting everything. The phone checking had been once, when Vivian noticed Derek acting strangely. The paranoia had been justified because Derek actually was hiding things. But stripped of context, it sounded like madness. In your opinion, is Mrs. Mercer mentally fit to be a primary caregiver? Harper hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet the court reporter asked her to repeat it, I have concerns about her stability. I think she needs help. Professional help. The gavel came down for recess. Vivian caught Harper in the hallway. Why the word came out broken, barely recognizable. Why would you do that? 12 years, Harper. 12 years of friendship. Harper's face crumpled. She looked smaller than Vivian had ever seen her, hunched into herself like she was trying to disappear. He offered me $50,000, she whispered. I am about to lose my house. Viv, I have nothing. I am 3 months behind on my mortgage, and my credit cards are maxed, and I did not know what else to do. You sold me out. For money. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I thought maybe you would understand someday. I thought maybe the money would help me get back on my feet, and then I could pay you back somehow. Pay me back. Vivian laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just testified that I am mentally unfit to raise my own child. You helped him try to take my daughter away from me. How exactly were you planning to pay that back? Harper had no answer. She just stood there, crying, as Vivian walked away. The second catastrophe came 3 days later. Derek filed fraud accusations against Vivian, claiming she had stolen from their joint accounts, the same accounts she had documented him draining for 18 months. But somehow he had created a paper trail that made it look like she was the thief. Her bank froze all her assets pending investigation. She had no money. She could not pay Preston's legal fees. She could not pay for the psychological evaluation that was required by the court. She could not pay for anything. I will cover your expenses, Bennett said when she told him, I cannot let you do that. You are not letting me do anything. I am choosing to help. It is too much. Bennett's jaw tightened. Vivian, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me do something useful with it. Let me help you fight. She wanted to refuse. Everything in her screamed that she should not be dependent on anyone, should not owe anyone anything. But the truth was, without Bennett's help, she had nothing. Okay, she said, but I am paying you back. Every cent. When this is over. If that makes you feel better. The third catastrophe came on January 29th. Vivian was in the kitchen of Bennett's guest house, trying to eat something, despite the nausea that had become her constant companion. The stress was taking its toll. She had not slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. Her hands shook constantly. Her head pounded with a headache that never quite went away. The first contraction hit without warning, sharp and sudden, like someone had reached inside her and squeezed. She doubled over, gasping, her coffee cup shattering on the floor. No, she whispered. No, no, no. It is too early. 34 weeks. 6 weeks early. Another contraction, worse than the first. She felt wetness between her legs and looked down to see pink-tinged fluid spreading across the tile. Bennett found her on the floor 3 minutes later, crying and clutching her belly while contractions came faster and faster. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. They loaded her onto a stretcher, started an IV, hooked her up to monitors. The baby's heart rate was elevated but stable. The contractions were 4 minutes apart. At the hospital, Dr. Catherine Pierce managed to stop the labor with medication, but the damage was done. Strict bed rest. Dr. Pierce said, her voice gentle but firm. Any stress could trigger another episode. Your body is telling you it has had enough. You need to listen. Vivian lay in the hospital bed, hooked to monitors that tracked every heartbeat, and felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. Her best friend had betrayed her. Her money was gone. Her baby had almost come 6 weeks early, and Derek was winning. For the first time since December 19th, Vivian considered giving up, just signing whatever papers Derek wanted, walking away with nothing, ending the nightmare. She stared at the ceiling and wondered if fighting was even worth it anymore. 3 in the morning. The hospital was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the distant footsteps of nurses making their rounds. Vivian could not sleep. Again, she lay in the darkness, one hand on her belly where her daughter kicked restlessly, and tried to remember what it felt like to be happy, what it felt like to believe in love and trust and the fundamental goodness of people. She could not remember. It felt like those memories belonged to someone else, someone naive and foolish and dead. A soft knock at the door. Bennett stood in the dim light from the hallway. He looked as tired as she felt, dark circles under his eyes and his usually immaculate hair disheveled. Your mother called me, he said quietly. She said you were not responding to her texts. I do not want to talk. I know, but I am here anyway. He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down without waiting for permission. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The monitors beeped. The baby kicked. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything she could not say. I am thinking about giving up, she finally admitted. The words came out small and broken and nothing like the confident woman she had been before December 19th. He is going to win anyway. He has planned for everything. He has turned everyone against me, even Harper. So you just let him take your daughter. I do not know what else to do. The tears came without warning, hot and desperate and completely beyond her control. I have nothing left. Bennett, my money is frozen. My best friend is testifying against me. My body is literally falling apart from the stress. And Derek is sitting in his lawyer's office right now, probably laughing about how easy this was. She turned to look at him, and even in the darkness, she could see the intensity of his gray eyes fixed on her face. Tell me honestly, what chance do I have? Bennett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different than she had ever heard it. Rougher, more raw, like the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. Let me tell you something about Rachel, he said, his fiancée, the woman who died. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Single mother at 22, put herself through law school while working 2 jobs, built a career, raised a daughter, and never complained about any of it. And when her ex-husband started stalking her, she did not run. She got a restraining order. She hired security. She documented everything. What happened? She did everything right. Everything, and it still was not enough. Because some monsters do not play by the rules. Some monsters do not care about restraining orders or security systems or documentation. Some monsters just wait until you let your guard down, until you think you are safe, and then they strike. Bennett's hands were clenched in his lap, knuckles white. I was in Tokyo when it happened, closing a deal that I thought was more important than being home. I had security cameras. I had private guards. I had the best lawyers money could buy. But I was not there, and by the time I got back, it was too late. I am sorry, but I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you this because I need you to understand something. His eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering. I could not save Rachel. I had all the money in the world, and I could not save her. But you, Vivian, you saved yourself. That night in the snow, I watched you through my cameras. I watched you knock on your door for 7 minutes in 17-degree weather. I watched you refuse to give up, refuse to lie down and die, refuse to let him win. And then I watched you walk to my gate and ask for help. He leaned forward. Asking for help is not giving up. Accepting help is not weakness. You have been trying to fight this alone because you think that is what strength looks like. But strength is not refusing help. Strength is building an army. An army. Your mother, my grandmother, Cordelia, Preston, me, we are your army. Vivian, We believe in you. We want to fight beside you. But you have to let us. Something shifted in Vivian's chest. A crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The wall that said she had to do everything herself. Prove everything herself. Survive everything alone. I do not know how to let people help me, she admitted. You learn. One person at a time. One choice at a time. The baby kicked, hard and insistent, as if adding her vote to the conversation. What if I let you help and we still lose? Then at least you will not lose alone. But Vivian, look at what you have done. In 2 months, you uncovered 18 months of fraud. You found evidence of attempted murder. You built a case that has Derek terrified enough to commit perjury and bribery to fight back. You did all of that while pregnant, while traumatized, while being actively sabotaged. Imagine what you could do with support. She thought about it, really thought about it. Derek had 2 years to plan his attack. She had 2 months to defend against it. And despite everything, despite the fake videos and the bought testimony and the frozen assets, she was still fighting. Maybe that meant something. Maybe she was stronger than she knew. You really think I can win this? I think you are the only person who can win this. But not alone. Never alone. Vivian took a deep breath, then another. Then she reached for her phone. What are you doing? Calling Cordelia. And my mother. And Preston. She looked at Bennett, and for the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered in her eyes. You said strength is building an army, so let us build one. Sloane Whitfield arrived at Bennett's estate 3 days later. Vivian had been released from the hospital with strict instructions to rest, which she ignored completely. There was too much work to do, too many plans to make, too little time before the custody hearing that would determine her daughter's future. When security announced that Derek's mistress was at the gate, Vivian's first instinct was to send her away. She had nothing to say to the woman who had helped destroy her marriage. But something made her hesitate. Let her in, she said. Sloane looked nothing like the polished woman Vivian had seen through her living room window. Her makeup was smudged, her designer clothes were wrinkled, and when she pushed up her sleeve to adjust her purse strap, Vivian saw bruises, fresh bruises, purple fingerprints pressed into pale skin. He hit me, Sloane said without preamble. Her voice was flat, defeated, stripped of any pretense. 3 nights ago? I told him maybe he should stop fighting so hard. Maybe he should just accept the settlement and move on. He grabbed my arm and called me names I will not repeat and said if I did not do exactly what he told me, he would make sure I lost everything. Vivian studied the woman across from her, 28 years old, blonde, pretty, the kind of woman Derek collected like trophies, the kind of woman Vivian had been. Once, why are you telling me this? Because I am done. Sloane's eyes filled with tears. I believed everything he told me. He said you knew about us. He said you were cold and controlling and crazy. He said you trapped him with the pregnancy, that you stopped taking birth control without telling him, that you forced him into fatherhood against his will. That is not true. Any of it. I know. I know that now. Sloane laughed, but it was bitter and broken. I am pregnant too. 10 weeks. He promised to marry me after the divorce. He promised we would raise both babies together, like a real family. The universe, Vivian thought, had a profoundly sick sense of humor. What do you want from me? I want to help you destroy him. Silence filled the room. Vivian looked at this woman, this mistress, this person she should hate more than anyone in the world. And she saw herself 2 years ago, before the wedding, before the pregnancy, when Derek was just a charming man with an easy smile and a way of making her feel special. Sloane was not her enemy. Sloane was another victim, another woman deceived by a man who specialized in deception. What do you have, everything? Sloane pulled out her phone. Text messages where he brags about the insurance plot. Recordings of him coaching me on what to say in court. Evidence that he bribed Harper Thornton. $50,000 to testify against you. I have the bank transfer records. Vivian's breath caught. You have proof that he bribed Harper. It is all here. Every message. Every recording. Every lie. She handed over the phone to Vivian scrolled through months of text, months of evidence, months of ammunition against the man who had tried to destroy her. Why did you save all of this? Because somewhere deep down, I think I always knew the truth. I just did not want to see it. Sloane wiped her eyes. He is a monster. Vivian, I did not want to believe it, but he is, and I am not going to help him hurt you anymore. Vivian looked at Sloane for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took Sloane's hand. He lied to both of us. Vivian said, but together we can make sure he never lies to anyone again. Sloane nodded, tears streaming down her face. What do you need me to do? Vivian smiled. It was the first real smile she had felt in months. I need you to testify. That night, Vivian sat with Preston and Bennett and Cordelia around the dining room table. The evidence from Sloane spread out before them. This changes everything. Preston said, his voice carried barely suppressed excitement. The bribery alone is enough to get Harper's testimony thrown out. The recordings prove premeditation and conspiracy, and the text messages about the insurance plot. This is a slam dunk for the criminal case. It is not enough, Vivian said. Everyone looked at her. I do not just want to win in court. I do not want a quiet settlement or a sealed record. I want him destroyed, publicly. I want everyone to know exactly what he did. Cordelia leaned forward, her sharp eyes gleaming. What do you have in mind? Vivian pulled out her phone and showed them an invitation. The Domestic Violence Survivors Foundation Gala. 300 of the most influential people in the state. Media coverage. Live streaming. And Derek Mercer is one of the keynote speakers. Preston frowned. How did he get invited to speak at a domestic violence charity? He donated $50,000 last month. Vivian's voice dripped with irony. Probably with the money he stole from our joint accounts. He is presenting himself as an advocate for vulnerable women. The audacity. Cordelia murmured, I want to take him down there, in front of everyone, on camera, where he cannot lie his way out of it. That is risky. Preston warned, if anything goes wrong, we could lose everything. Vivian looked at Bennett, at Cordelia, at her mother, who had been listening from the doorway. I am done playing it safe. Safe nearly got me killed. It is time to take risks. Her mother stepped forward and put a hand on her shoulder. We do not break, Lorraine said. We break them. Vivian nodded. Then let us break him. The Domestic Violence Survivors Foundation Gala was held at the Grand Marquis Hotel, a glittering venue that catered to the wealthy and powerful. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne and congratulating themselves on their generosity. Media cameras positioned at strategic angles, a live stream broadcasting to thousands more online, and Derek Mercer, standing backstage, preparing to give his keynote speech about supporting vulnerable women. Vivian watched him through the crack in a service door. He looked confident, polished, the charming man she had fallen in love with 6 years ago, playing his favorite role, the hero. He had no idea what was coming. Are you ready? Bennett's voice was quiet beside her. Vivian touched her belly, where her daughter kicked in anticipation. I have been ready since December 19th. The Gala Master of Ceremonies took the stage. Distinguished guests, please welcome our keynote speaker, a man whose generous donation has made tonight possible, a true advocate for women's safety and domestic harmony, Mr. Derek Mercer. Applause filled the ballroom as Derek strode to the podium. He smiled at the crowd, that charming smile that Vivian knew so well, the smile that hid a monster beneath its warmth. Thank you, he began. I am honored to be here tonight, supporting this important cause. Domestic violence is a tragedy that affects millions of women every year. As a husband and soon-to-be father, I feel a deep responsibility to. He never finished the sentence. The giant screens behind him flickered. The slideshow of foundation logos and inspirational quotes disappeared, replaced by security camera footage. A pregnant woman standing in the snow, knocking on a door, calling out to someone inside. A man appearing at the window, looking directly at her, smiling, closing the curtain. The ballroom went silent. 300 people stared at the screens, watching the footage play on loop. Derek stood frozen at the podium, his face draining of color. Then the text messages appeared, scrolling across the screens in damning succession. Hypothermia death time, hoping for an accident. Life insurance pays double for accidental death. Just stick to the script. Tell them she is crazy. I will handle the rest. The bribery records, the recordings of Derek coaching Sloane, the evidence of insurance fraud, everything's fair, displayed for 300 witnesses and thousands more online. Derek tried to run. He stepped away from the podium, heading for the exit. Security blocked his path. Cordelia's security, positioned at every door. Vivian stepped onto the stage. The crowd gasped. She was unmistakably pregnant, unmistakably the woman from the footage, unmistakably the victim he had tried to paint as crazy. 3 months ago, she said, her voice steady and clear, this man locked me outside in 17-degree weather while I was 8 months pregnant. He watched me freeze for 7 minutes. He smiled, then he closed the curtain and went back to his girlfriend. She let that sink in. These are the charges being filed tomorrow. Insurance fraud, attempted murder, witness tampering, evidence fabrication, bribery of a witness. She held up the documents, the official paperwork that Preston had prepared. He thought I would die quiet. He thought I would go away. He thought because I gave up my career for him. I forgot how to fight. She looked directly at Derek, who stood surrounded by security, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. I did not forget. Derek, I was just waiting for the right moment. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of everything she had survived. And sweetheart, this is it. The ballroom doors opened. Detective Morrison entered, followed by uniformed officers. Derek Mercer, you are under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and witness tampering. You have the right to remain silent. They handcuffed him in front of 300 witnesses and 3 news cameras. Derek said nothing, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The charming man had finally run out of lies. As they led him away, Vivian stepped down from the stage. Her mother was there, tears streaming down her face. Bennett was there, his gray eyes shining with pride. Cordelia was there, looking extremely satisfied. You did it, Lorraine whispered, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. You destroyed him. No. Vivian pulled back and looked at her mother, then at everyone who had helped her survive. We destroyed him. Together. 1 year later, December 19th, the anniversary. Vivian stood on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the snow fall. Inside, her mother hung ornaments on the Christmas tree. Cordelia directed the placement of the star topper with the authority of a former federal judge. Grace, almost 1 year old, toddled across the floor, chasing a ball that kept rolling away from her determined grasp. Bennett arrived with groceries for dinner. He had become a permanent fixture in her life over the past year. Not a boyfriend, not exactly. Something still forming, something built on honesty instead of performance. He found her on the porch, wrapped in a warm coat, watching the snow. You okay, he asked. Today is a hard anniversary. I am okay. She meant it. I spent so long being angry. Then what? Then afraid. But today I just feel grateful. Grateful for what? For surviving. For her. She looked through the window at Grace. For learning who I really am when everything else burned away. Bennett handed her an envelope. Inside was the original memory card from his security camera. The footage that had saved her life. I thought you might want to destroy it, he said. Or keep it. Your choice. Vivian considered. Then she tucked the envelope into her pocket. I will keep it. Not to watch. Just to remember. That I survived the worst night of my life and built something better from the ashes. She looked at the falling snow. Same weather as that night, but now she was inside. Warm. Surrounded by people who chose her. The door was unlocked. It would always be unlocked now, because Vivian had learned that asking for help is not weakness, that trusting the wrong person does not make you stupid, and that some endings are just beginnings in disguise. She thought losing everything would break her. Instead, it showed her exactly who she was, a woman who walks through fire and comes out holding a match.